You are told the system is solid, and you believe it because solidity sounds like safety when spoken by calm voices behind polished desks. The bank's hum quietly lights on doors open a reassuring normal that convinces you danger announces itself loudly. Your money sits still, numbers resting peacefully, and stillness feels like proof nothing is moving beneath the surface. You trust balance sheets the way sailors trust calm seas forgetting storms do not begin with waves. Confidence circulates freely, passed hand to hand, reinforced by repetition rather than understanding. You hear the word stable often enough that it becomes background noise, like air you stop noticing. Small warnings appear as rumors brushed aside because they lack urgency and do not fit the narrative. Deposits feel permanent, as if money remembers loyalty and would never abandon where it feels welcome. You plan futures comfortably, stacking years ahead, without checking the floor supporting them. Debt waits patiently in the corners quiet, as furniture, never interrupting conversation. The system rewards trust with convenience, making doubt feel unnecessary and even rude. You confuse accessibility with strength, mistaking open doors for unbreakable walls. Banks speak in soothing rhythms, the cadence of certainty designed to slow your heartbeat. You notice nothing wrong because nothing asks for your attention yet. Stability feels like inertia, forward motion, sustained without effort or intention. The idea of collapse seems dramatic, belonging to history books and distant places. You reassure yourself that safeguards exist, unseen guardians watching quietly from behind the glass. Confidence settles in heavy and warm like sleep that comes too easily. You do not realize stability is a posture, not a state held only, while no one shifts weight. And so you rest unaware that the system is balanced precisely until the moment it isn't. You notice the first change in tone, not in numbers, when employees stop making eye contact and start smiling like they are practicing. A rumor spreads like a draft under a door, thin, cold, easy to deny until you feel it on your ankles. You check your account more often, calling it caution, pretending the urge isn't fear disguised as routine. The bank app loads a little slower, and that extra second feels like a widening crack you cannot unsee. Officials insist everything is fine, and their insistence feels louder than the problem they claim does not exist. You see a short line outside one branch, then another, and you tell yourself it is coincidence, not choreography. Confidence begins to separate from convenience, and you realize ease was never the same thing as safety. You remember that money is a promise, and promises only work while everyone agrees to pretend together. Debt shifts in the corner like something waking, as if it has been listening patiently for your doubt. You feel the system's weight redistribute subtle at first, like a bridge flexing under a crowd that suddenly stops singing. The news uses gentle words, careful phrases, the verbal equivalent of walking on thin ice. You hear the phrase, strong fundamentals, repeated, and repetition becomes a warning siren in your mind. Withdrawals begin quietly, the way mice begin moving when a house is about to empty. You tell yourself you will not panic, yet you find your keys faster coat already in your hand. The line outside grows faces calm, but eyes sharp, calculating time and distance like practiced survivors. Inside, the air feels different, too warm, as if the building is trying to comfort you with heat. You watch tellers count cash more carefully, and careful becomes contagious. Stability starts to feel like performance art, convincing only from the back row. You realize the system is stable only while trust stays still, and trust is never still. And when you finally step forward, you feel it. The bank was stable until you needed proof. You feel eyes on you in the line, not hostile, just alert everyone, measuring everyone else for signs of intent. The silence grows dense, broken only by printers and footsteps. Ordinary sounds, now carrying unfamiliar weight. You sense time stretching, each minute expanding, as if the building itself wants to delay what comes next. Confidence thins into etiquette, smiles exchange to confirm nothing improper is happening yet. You notice how often people check exits casually, pretending curiosity instead of calculation. The word liquidity is never spoken, yet everyone feels its absence like missing air. A guard shifts position, and the movement ripples through the room like a nervous twitch. You remember being told banks fail suddenly, and you realize suddenly is made of many quiet moments. Withdrawal limits appear on screens framed as protection, though protection for whom remains unclear. You accept the limit without argument, surprised by how easily obedience replaces outrage. Debt presses closer now, no longer furniture, but a presence leaning into every thought. Outside, more people arrive, their calm faces rehearse their hands, already holding documents. The system feels smaller inside corridors, narrowing as certainty drains away. You hear someone joke softly, humor used like a pressure valve no one trusts. Confidence becomes contagious in reverse doubt, spreading faster than reassurance ever did. You tell yourself this is precaution, not fear, because fear would demand action. The line moves forward by inches progress, measured in steps instead of certainty. You feel relief when you reach the counter, then shame for feeling relief at all. Trust breaks quietly, not with alarms, but with lowered eyes and shortened sentences. And you understand stability never vanished. It simply required more belief than anyone had left. You leave the bank lighter in cash, but heavier in thought, realizing reassurance never follows you home. The street looks unchanged, yet everything feels staged, like scenery waiting to be dismantled after closing time. Messages arrive, insisting calm, and insistence becomes its own form of noise. You notice friends speaking cautiously, sentences padded to avoid triggering worry they no longer know how to soothe. The word temporary returns softer now, as if afraid to wake something sleeping underneath it. You sense dependency tightening invisible threads, drawing choices closer together. Confidence becomes conditional valid, only if nobody asks for it all at once. The system still functions, but function feels rehearsed, maintained through effort rather than ease. You remember how stability once felt boring and envy that boredom deeply. Debt shifts again, rearranging priorities without asking permission. You hear stories of isolated issues, singular problems, carefully framed to prevent patterns from forming. Patterns form anyway, quietly in kitchens, offices, and late-night conversations. The idea of safety narrows, shrinking to what can be accessed quickly. You keep small sums, close habits adjusting without discussion. Confidence retreats into private calculations, never spoken aloud. Officials appear less, delegating presence to statements and screens. You feel watched by patience, the waiting kind that never comforts. Stability becomes a memory you compare everything against. The system leans forward, balanced on belief rather than structure. And you understand it is stable only as long as everyone agrees not to test it. Days pass without headlines, and that quiet feels deliberate, like a pause held too long to remain natural. You notice banks closing earlier, calling it efficiency, though efficiency never used to feel like retreat. Confidence thins into routine again. Habits doing the work belief once handled effortlessly. The system speaks less, trusting silence to calm what explanations might disturb. You watch interest move through conversations without names, an uninvited guest everyone pretends not to see. Debt now dictates tempo, slowing some choices, rushing others, conducting life with an unseen hand. You tell yourself, restraint is maturity, yet the restraint feels enforced, not chosen. The idea of access changes, no longer assumed, but planned for, like weather. You feel a subtle competition emerge, everyone trying to be earlier rather than right. Confidence fractures privately, each person calculating safety alone. Officials repeat stability less often, as if repetition has begun to sound like pleading. The system still holds, but it feels brittle, like glass warmed too quickly. You sense belief, turning into vigilance, watchfulness, replacing trust. Small inconveniences multiply delays, limits, checks, all framed as temporary measures. Temporary starts to feel structural, built into daily expectations. You notice how quickly people adapt, and how adaptation becomes permission. Stability now requires effort from everyone, not just those behind the desks. The system leans again, redistributing weight without asking consent. You realize stability is not strength but agreement, and agreement is quietly eroding. And you continue because stepping back would mean admitting how much balance depends on belief alone. You feel the pace slow, deliberately, like a heartbeat controlled, to avoid revealing how close it is to racing. The banking halls grow quieter, not empty, just hushed, as if voices themselves might disturb the balance. You sense confidence being rationed, offered sparingly, never enough to relax fully. The system begins asking for patience instead of trust. A subtle downgrade you are not meant to notice. Debt tightens its schedule reminders, arriving with polite firmness that leaves no room for refusal. You adjust expectations again, lowering them carefully so disappointment lands softly. Stability is still declared, but now it sounds like reassurance given to a frightened child. You notice how often access depends on timing being early rather than certain. The crowd moves with shared caution, every step synchronized without discussion. Confidence feels conditional, valid only, while no one moves too fast. Officials emphasize order, not growth, maintaining shape rather than direction. You feel watched by patience again, the kind that waits without blinking. The system functions, but every function now requires permission. Small frictions appear everywhere, just enough to slow movement without stopping it. Temporary measures stack higher, forming a ceiling that gradually lowers. You notice how calm is praised more than clarity. Dependency settles deeper, accepted as structure rather than emergency. Confidence becomes procedural, checked, stamped, and approved. You sense balance, turning fragile weight held by agreement alone. And you understand, stability lasts only until someone tests whether it still exists. You begin to feel the weight of coordination, how stability now depends on everyone behaving exactly as expected. The banks remain open, yet openness feels ceremonial doors wide, but thresholds heavy. Confidence becomes a schedule, something maintained by timing rather than belief. You notice how often reassurance is delayed, arriving only after unease has already settled. Debt rearranges priorities again, teaching patience through constraint instead of choice. The system praises calm behavior, quietly isolating those who ask the wrong questions. You sense agreement, thinning individuals, trusting instinct over instruction. Stability now requires choreography, each movement measured to avoid disturbing balance. You watch money hesitate in hands, pausing as if unsure where it is safest. Officials speak less frequently, allowing routine to replace explanation. The word resilient appears more often than healthy, and the difference begins to matter. You feel tension migrate inward, no longer shared, carried privately. Temporary adjustments repeat, until repetition itself becomes policy. The system still stands, but it stands rigid, unable to bend without creaking. Confidence fractures into personal calculations, each person managing exposure alone. You sense the floor, no longer forgiving missteps. Dependency feels complete now, not alarming, simply assumed. You tell yourself, this is how mature systems behave quietly, efficiently. Yet, efficiency feels brittle, precise enough to shatter under surprise. And you understand stability survives only while nothing unexpected dares to happen. You sense how fragile everything feels now balanced, not by strength, but by everyone agreeing to move carefully. Confidence survives as timing, knowing when to arrive, when to leave, and when not to ask questions. The banks still function, but function feels conditional, granted moment by moment. You notice how silence is rewarded more than understanding. Debt tightens its grip, subtly guiding behavior without ever raising its voice. The word stable appears again quieter, like a whisper meant not to startle. You watch money pause in hands, hesitating like a bird, unsure where to land. Officials emphasize preparedness, though preparedness feels indistinguishable from fear. The system depends on rhythm, now steady steps taken in unison. You feel trust thinning into compliance obedience, replacing belief. Temporary measures repeat until they shape expectation. Confidence hides behind procedure rules, standing in for reassurance. You sense impatience, growing beneath calm faces, a pressure waiting for release. Stability becomes fragile choreography, each step precise, unforgiving. Dependency feels complete, the idea of independence now sounding naive. You tell yourself nothing has broken, though everything feels strained. The system holds its breath, suspended by habit alone. You feel the weight shift, again redistribution without consent. Confidence no longer reassures, it restrains. And you realize stability ends not with collapse, but with the first unexpected step. You feel anticipation drain away, replaced by vigilance, a constant scanning for signals that no longer come with explanations. Confidence exists now only as compliance, doing what is expected to avoid attracting attention. The banks remain standing, but standing feels like holding breath underwater. You notice how quickly access depends on timing, who arrives first, who hesitates last. Debt reshapes instinct, teaching you when to wait and when to move without thinking. Officials speak rarely now, trusting routine to quiet what words might ignite. Stability is measured by absence of noise, not presence of trust. You sense belief evaporating fully, leaving behind procedure and habit as scaffolding. Temporary rules harden into expectation, no longer questioned, simply lived with. Confidence feels borrowed, fragile, returned carefully before it breaks. You watch people plan shorter futures conversations, ending closer to today. The system survives by narrowing choice until obedience feels like relief. Dependency is no longer discussed. It is assumed like gravity. You tell yourself collapse would be louder, faster, unmistakable. Yet the quiet stretches heavy and final, like a room after the last guest leaves. The bank's function continues to be mistaken for health. You feel permanence settling in, not announced, just accepted. Confidence becomes something you defend rhetorically, never demonstrate. The weight shifts again, and this time the structure does not correct. And you understand, stability ends when belief can no longer absorb surprise. In the end, nothing explodes. The banking system simply stops convincing anyone it can catch what begins to fall. You search for the moment of failure, but find only years of calm decisions made to avoid discomfort. Stability was never strength, only agreement, and agreement dissolved quietly when pressure arrived. Confidence left first unnoticed, slipping away long before numbers were forced to follow. The banks remain standing, yet standing without trust is just architecture waiting for emptiness. You realize collapse is not an event, but a realization shared, too late to prevent it. Debt completes its work, silently collecting obedience instead of panic. The system did not betray you. It reflected how long belief was asked to do the heavy lifting. Stability ends the moment belief can no longer absorb doubt without cracking. And when that happens, the system is no longer stable, only upright moments before it gives way.